Hey everybody, it is Natalie from Power Moon Tarot. Thank you so much for being here today. I am going to go ahead and make sure our technology is up and running. And today is a very special video, and this video is the result of a subscriber request who wondered if I would do a video on Kendrick versus Drake and the rap beef that has been going on. Now, luckily, they both have timed charts, astrology wise. So I have accurate charts for both Kendrick Lamar and Drake. So I'm able to look at both of their charts. Let me just make sure. It's a very special video. Okay. All right. I'm up and running. Anyway, I'm going to switch it over and share my screen here in a minute. And let me go ahead and do that. Thank you for being patient with me here, and would love to hear your thoughts and your feedback as I'm going through the webcast. In the meantime, let us go ahead and bring up the main screen here. Okay, thank you so much. And for those of you that are going to be here today, hi, Garnet Goddess. Oh my goodness. Garnet Goddess, thank you for joining. I'm just saying hi to those who are in the chat. And oh, thank you for the beautiful comment as well, Garnet Goddess, and the way you ran here so quickly. That's so funny. And actually, you guys, I had made that post about, not wanting to like glorify celebrity culture and wanting to do more historical charts and more transit videos, which I will do. There was someone in the comments that wondered if requested this video and that I take a look at the feud between Drake and Kendrick and look at the astrology of it. So that is why I'm doing the video. Just to clarify that, I'm not trying to be like an ambulance chaser astrologer and just jump on the hot topics and I'm really trying to be thoughtful about the content that I put out there. And so I just want everyone to know that too. Please don't take this video as a sign that I'm like, supporting all celebrities or that all the videos on my channel are going to be based on celebrities. And hopefully through the sharing of this video, you guys will learn something too about astrology. You'll learn something about your own charts. You'll learn something about like, just in general about these rap beefs and these rap battles. And for those of you that have been around for a while, like me, you remember back in the day, the East Coast versus West Coast, the Biggie, the Tupac, you remember all that stuff going back. And it's funny because Snoop Dogg got drug into this rap battle a little bit, and he was on Twitter and he's like, I'm going back to bed. And I just thought that that was a funny comment. He's like, let these young guys duke it out. I'm going back to bed. So anyway, I think it's important that we have a sense of humor when we're, looking at everything. Of course, I was very familiar with Drake, but I hadn't really heard Kendrick Lamar's work that much. So I have listened to more of his music and, of course, researched what's been going on between the two as I've been, preparing for this video. So quickly, when I start, I'm going to talk about why they are in a rap battle and why it started in the first place. And if you're watching this video later and you want to skip past this part because you already know what the beef is and you're already well aware of it, I'll be having timestamps in the description box below once I get around to doing those. So let me go ahead and begin. So I have up a Wikipedia page. There's actually a week at Wikipedia for the feud that the two rappers are having. And basically back in 2010, 2011, Drake and Kendrick were friends and they collaborated with one another. Then in 2013, Kendrick rapped on a song called Control by Big Sean. And as he was rapping on that album, he basically named off a bunch of rappers, Drake included, who he wanted to basically take all their fans and bury them in the ground. And so, but it was a long list. I think it was 8 different rappers that he mentioned. So Drake just happened to be one of those. But that's kind of what started the feud, was back in 2013. Well, then everything was quiet for a while until about October of 2023, when J. Cole came out with a song called First Person Shooter that had Drake rapping on the album. And he basically said that J. Cole, Drake, and Kendrick were the big three in rap. And then Kendrick came back and later and was like, there's no big three, there's just me. And so it just started off this whole chain of events where the insults between Drake and Kendrick started to get very personal, where they were attacking each other's families, they were attacking each other's relationships. Drake was accused of having a secret child. He was accused of being a sexual predator. You know, basically Drake threw it back to Kendrick and was like, "Oh, you know, you're abusing your wife, you engaged in domestic violence, and your second child is actually fathered by another man." So they were really starting to trade a lot of heavy insults with one another. And some of those tracks were called, they actually go through on this Wikipedia page, they go through, look at Drake's side, has J. Cole and Sexy Red, whereas Kendrick has all these other people, and Drake has a lot of beefs with a lot of people. He's got enemies, got a lot of enemies. If you know Drake, that song by Drake, Enemies, I've got a lot of enemies. And you can see the different diss tracks down here that they put out towards one another, such as Push-Ups was, Push-Ups, 7-Minute Drill, Tailor-Made Freestyle, and then Kendrick had Like That, Euphoria, 616 in LA, Meet the Grams, Not Like Us, and BBL Drizzy, which is a song about Drake getting a BBL and trying to hide it from everyone. So there is quite a bit of, things going on with this case. And, one thing, if you know anything, I'm assuming you know something about Drake and Kendrick if you're here already and you're familiar with them. Here's a picture of Kendrick Lamar wearing a crown. This is a Tiffany diamond jewel encrusted crown of thorns that Kendrick is wearing as he is performing. And we'll talk about, he's got the moon in Pisces, so he definitely has that, rocking with that Jesus symbolism. And here's Drizzy Drake, or as he's known on Instagram, Champagne Poppy. And you can see here, he's sophisticated, he's drinking, he's an artist, they're just very different artists. Like Kendrick is more raw, I would say, and Drake is more, I don't know, he raps more about relationships and personal dramas and things like that, rather than Kendrick, which tends to rap more about society and his inner struggles with things. And so they're just very different type of rappers, where Drake is really into, iced out OVO chains, watches worth, Kendrick is wearing a crown, a Tiffany crown with jewels in it. Okay. So, anyway, but this is Kendrick's cover of one of his albums, Mr. Moral and the Big Steppers. And you can see the album cover with his oldest child, and there's his wife in the background there with their second. So that's a very intimate album cover, and we'll talk more about that later. Where here's one of Drake's album cover, Certified Lover Boy from 2021, where there's all these women that look pregnant. Okay, so Drake's coming through like the real Scorpio there. And then we have Kendrick Lamar's album Damn, that actually won a Pulitzer Prize, and he's one of the first rappers ever to win a Pulitzer Prize. So just to give you guys an idea, they're very different individuals and they are very different rappers. Now, let's go ahead and we are going to first start talking about Drake's chart. What I'm going to do is I'm going to present Drake, I'm going to present Kendrick, and then I'm going to show the synastry of their two charts together and basically why they're fighting. Okay, so we are going to go ahead and start with Drake. Now, for Drake, I'm going to annotate here. And let me just make sure I've got my annotate up and running. I should have probably tested that first, you guys. And annotate screen. Okay, there we go. I got my annotate up and running. Okay, So, basically with Drake, okay, so Drake is a Leo rising. Now, this is a time chart, so we know it has a double A rating, so we know that it's pretty valid birth time. He has his ascendant at 29 Leo. He's got a ton of planets in Scorpio, okay, at the bottom of his chart there. He's got the Mars in Aquarius, all right, and he has the moon in Cancer in the 12th house. Now, a lot of people accuse Drake of being way too sensitive and that he is like, a babyish almost in the way that he is too sensitive. And he's got that very sensitive moon in Cancer in the 12th house. I also think it's kind of interesting with the moon in Cancer in the 12th house that Drake has been accused of having a secret child that he's not told anyone about. Of course, the moon is family, moon in Cancer, family, children in the 12th house of secrets and self-undoing. And he's constantly getting accused of being inauthentic as well, which, Leo rising is definitely, if you're a Leo rising, to really present yourself in the world, you really, in the right way for you, you really want to be authentic. Now, all of us want to be authentic, really, in the way we're presenting ourselves, but particularly for a Leo rising, it is about, being authentic and shining your true self and shining the light on who you are. But you can see his ascendant is at 29 degrees Leo. Now, in astrology, the 29th degree is a critical degree. Now, it also makes me wonder a little bit. I mean, his birth time appears to be accurate according to where I found it. But if he was born a couple minutes later, he would be a Virgo rising. And so I think we just need to keep that in mind with the Leo rising at the 29th degree. Now, it's interesting when we have stars that have that 29th degree Leo rising, because a lot of times that means that they've got a problem with their fame, or they've got a problem with their, with the public or fame, or having fame is actually really hard on them for some reason because they're not accepted or they're not seen for who they are, or they get incredibly big and famous and then have these insane downfalls. And one other chart where the ascendant is at 29 Leo that I can think of off the top of my head is Bernie Madoff, who was this huge, rich investment banker who ripped all these people off, who was extremely well-known, well-trusted, but he ripped all these people off and ended up going to prison and dying in prison. And so, people who are obsessed with fame, obsessed with their image and materialism, that could all be very much a Leo at the 29th anaretic degree type of an experience. But I think it's interesting with Drake because as a Leo rising at the 29th degree, he is always being questioned on his authenticity. And is he authentic? Is he true to who he is as a person or not? And that has been a major issue for him his entire career. Now, because he's a Leo rising, the sun in the chart is very important, and that sun is in a conjunction with Pluto, which, it's an interesting dynamic with him because people have talked about, I've heard a lot of interviews about him where people say he changes his identity all the time, and that's a very Sun Pluto thing, to be constantly searching for who you are and constantly changing your identity. Now it's in Scorpio, so you think, well, that's a fixed sign. So, it's not, I would think that person isn't really changing, but I also think because Drake had a very difficult relationship with his father, and you can see, when you see Sun Pluto in a chart like that in a conjunction, it's a father is a very mysterious figure that is hard to get to know. And Drake did indeed have a father who was absent, and Drake comes from a background where his mother was white and his father is black, but his father was not there all the time. And that whole aspect of not knowing yourself, not understanding where you come from, moon and Cancer in the 12th house, not belonging, feeling like you don't come from a place that you can really understand. And yeah, so I think that's interesting with the Sun Pluto. And, interviewers talking about Drake and saying, oh, he's constantly like, one week he's talking in a British accent. Then the next week he's speaking Arabic. Then the next week he is first we've got Houston Drake, then we've got Caribbean Drake, then we've got British Drake. Like he's just all over the map, and people find it, feel like he's hiding something. Okay. And people feel like with that scorpionic energy all trapped there in the fourth house, that Drake is hiding something. And with the Leo rising at the 29th degree, that he's not authentic. And the moon in the 12th house with the secret hidden child, that also doesn't really help things. So we've got that aspect with Drake. We've got this hidden aspect with him that we don't necessarily have with Kendrick. And we'll compare his chart here in a little bit, and I'll show you why his chart isn't as hidden as Drake's is. Drake is hiding his motivation for doing what he's doing. And people suspect that there's something off about him or inauthentic about him. And so we've got that going on. And of course, with the moon in Cancer in the 12th house, people saying he's too soft, he's too sensitive. And, one thing I do want to point out about Drake's chart is that he has a grand trine. Okay. There's a grand trine in water between Jupiter, the moon, and Venus. Okay. And Jupiter, the moon, and Venus are all forming a grand trine to one another. Now, this is a very lucky aspect for Drake, even though the moon and Jupiter are both in difficult houses in the 8th and 12th house. The moon is exalted in Cancer. Jupiter is in domicile in Pisces. Okay. And Venus rules the 10th house of his career. And he's got a grand water trine between Venus, Moon, and Jupiter, which says that, he does get a lot of lucky breaks that other people don't get. And the way that people have been kind of, jealous of him at times. Other rappers have been very jealous of him because he's always on the top and he's always got all these opportunities and he's always winning all the time. It aggravates other people and it does create a lot of enemies. Now, the moon rules the 12th house and the moon is in the 12th house, which also tells me there's an aspect of him emotionally that's always kind of locked away or kept separate. And he does have this song called Emotionless, which I think is interesting because people are always accusing him of being too soft or too sensitive. But he's got these songs where he writes about not feeling any emotions. And I think that's very moon in the 12th house. I'm sensitive, but I don't feel anything. That's also very cyclical. The way the moon is very cyclical and kind of feeling things and then feeling nothing. Okay. And I'm sure it's not great for his relationships. You see that very powerful Venus retrograde in Scorpio. There's been a lot of trust issues in his relationships, and a lot of the rapping that he does is about those trust issues that he has in his relationships. But if you look at Drake's chart, you can see that grand water trine with the moon, Jupiter, and Venus, particularly because Venus, according to Sect, is the best planet in this chart, as this is a night chart. And so you can see there's that powerful grand water trine. Now, Drake started off as a child actor. And, he got a lucky break basically at his school that he was going to. Someone was like, my dad's a producer and is looking for actors that are funny and have a goofy sense of humor. And someone was like, Drake does. And then he ended up being this child star on this show called Degrassi in Toronto, Canada. And that's a huge lucky break for someone to have that early on in their career. And so a lot of people I feel like have been, jealous maybe of his success and his career and the opportunities that he has had. That's a very scorpionic thing as well. To be like misunderstood and hated by everyone, or to have everybody being jealous of you or being jealous of other people. That's a very intense scorpionic type of energy to go through there. But I think, and one thing I'm going to point out when I show you guys Kendrick's chart is I'm going to show you how I believe Kendrick's chart is more difficult than Drake's chart. And I believe his life, in a lot of ways, has been more challenging. Now, that's not to say that Drake didn't have anything challenging in his life. And he does get very upset when people insinuate that, he didn't have any challenges or anything. But I think when he says, started from the bottom, now we're here, it's like, no, you didn't. You were a child actor. You grew up in a really nice neighborhood in Toronto called Forest Hill. And, you didn't start from the bottom and now you're here. Okay. You got a lot of opportunities. You got a lot of good things going for you. And again, people just finding that message that he is giving to be very inauthentic with the started from the bottom, now we're here. And Garnet Goddess is saying, I also have a retrograde Venus in sidereal. Yeah, Garnet Goddess, yeah, the Venus retrograde, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Venus retrograde because that can be a tough one, particularly because Venus is the planet of, our social relationships and our romantic relationships and how we get along with other people socially. And so I'm going to get into that a little bit more. Ashleen, yes, Ashleen, I do private natal chart readings. And thank you, Ashleen, for asking that question. I do private natal chart readings. And below this video, when I'm done making this video, I'll post the link to my website. And Lilith Rising Astrology is the name of my website. And I will post it below when I'm done with the video. And just keep an eye on this video. And then on my other videos, like my tarot videos, if you scroll down to the description box, you can find a link to my astrology website in there. Thank you for asking that, Ashleen. Yeah. Oh, Ashleen. Okay. You see, yes, you see that there's a booking for 150, but you don't. Okay. You know what? I need to open my dates. Thank you, Ashleen. I have another job on top of what I do here on my YouTube channel. So I get kind of busy sometimes, you guys. Ashleen, thank you very much for pointing that out. I will open up slots. I open up slots on Saturdays and Sundays at 2 p.m. Central Time. And I'll open up some slots for you. Sorry about that, Ashleen. I will do that. And yeah, thank you. Okay, let me go. Oh, Ashleen, that's so nice of you too to want to book a reading with me, and I really appreciate that. And I'm sorry, I need to look at my website and update that, and I will do that. And yeah. Yeah, and yeah, and Ashleen says, LMAO, Natalie calling out Drake. And yeah, I am calling him out a little bit because his chart. Now, again, I'm not saying the chart's easy because all of that Venus retrograde there, creating trust issues in his relationship, infidelities, issues, trusting people, etc. I also feel like the Sun Pluto is very challenging for the father and for his relationship with his father. His father ended up moving back to Memphis, and his father actually went to prison for drugs for a while. And I'm going to talk more about his father later, but the father relationship is a problem for Drake, and I do feel bad for him with that. He also talked about how his mother sacrificed a lot, Moon and Cancer in the 12th house, and took on a lot of debt in order for him to live in Forest Hill, to live in that nice neighborhood in Toronto, because she was pretty much a single mother at that time. And so I'm definitely not trying to say that Drake didn't have any issues, because he's got a Mars square Pluto in his chart. He's got a Sun Pluto. Those are some harsh positions. And with the Moon in the 12th house in Cancer, never really feeling like you belong anywhere. And I did listen to a video that Drake had where he's like, I never really feel like I belong anywhere. And, as a half Black, half Jewish person, growing up in a predominantly, Jewish neighborhood, going to a white school, being biracial, not really feeling like you belong anywhere and not really feeling like accepted or that anywhere really fully accepts you. And even as like a hip hop artist or a rapper, people, even no matter how many awards he wins, people don't really accept him. And so, I mean, I'm sure that is very painful. And I'm sure the experiences he went through were very painful with that. So definitely, not trying to say he didn't go through anything painful in his life, but I do think he's been given a lot more opportunities than most people in a lot of ways. And when we look at Kendrick's chart, you guys are going to go, whoa, because you're going to see it's harder than Drake's chart. It's more combative and in your face, I feel like in a lot of ways than Drake's chart, especially lyrically. And we'll talk about why that is, like lyrically, why he sounds so much more combative than Drake. Versus Drake is very much, it's interesting because if you think about writers and rappers and what they write about, you would look at their Mercury. And he's got Mercury at 24 degrees Scorpio. And it's in a conjunction with that Venus in Scorpio. So when Drake raps, he's rapping about, relationships, trust issues. His Mercury in Scorpio is in a conjunction with Venus, and Venus rules his 10th house of career as well. And so when he raps, he wants to rap about, relationships, trust issues, his success, his fame, his money. Okay, because Mercury also rules the second house of money in his chart, and Venus rules the 10th house of career. So when he's talking and rapping, Mercury in Venus conjunction, he is talking about money, success, career, relationships, trust issues. He's talking about those kinds of issues where Kendrick in his chart actually has a Mercury-Mars conjunction, and he is far more combative and like, calling out things in society and the way things are and all of that. He comes across much more serious in a lot of ways. And Kendrick has a Mercury opposition Saturn in his chart, where Drake does not have that. And so, when we talk about the planet Mercury and how a writer writes or how somebody raps or writes, we would definitely look at their Mercury. Now, what's interesting for Drake is he's been accused of having ghostwriters rap for him and not or ghostwriters write for him and not writing his own material. And you can see, that Mercury in Scorpio is squaring his ascendant in Leo. Okay, Mercury is also ruling the 11th house of friendship for Drake. So my friends are square my ascendant. And, Kendrick pointing out, hey, Drake, like you've got people in OVO on your record label who are talking shit behind your back, who who are actually double agents for me and are giving me information about you. And so, there could be definitely some mistrust with secrets with friends for Drake, with his ascendant squaring the ruler of his 11th house of friends. And with that Mercury and Scorpio there, some distrust amongst friends. And also, I feel in his chart too, issues with friends. Drake is kind of Drake, Mr. Take Your Girl, Drizzy. You know what I mean? Like he has been known to kind of swoop in there after his friends are done with a woman and kind of take that woman. And, we see the 11th house ruler in the conjunction with Venus and, kind of sneaking in there in Scorpio and taking my friend's woman. And then my friends are squaring my ascendant. So we kind of see that vibe in his chart of that, smooth. He's got that. Drake has always struck me as a Venusian type of a person. And, he's always just struck me as very like he raps about Venusian things with the Mercury Venus conjunction. He talks about relationships all the time. He's got, you know, he dresses like with a certain flair. He's very Venusian in a lot of ways, but also very scorpionic. Like he likes to wear bulletproof vests on stage. And so he's got that like scorpionic feel to him, but he always struck me as being very Venusian. And I think that Venus retrograde in his chart is particularly strong. Like it is very, very strong. And yeah, so got it. Yeah. Ashleen says they not like us. Exactly. Garnet Goddess, says the way you effortlessly read charts is so admirable. Oh, thank you. My Mercury and Gemini, and I'm not one to argue with. Okay. And yeah, my Mercury is also in Gemini as well, Garnet Goddess. And Ashleen is saying, "Oh my God, I can't." Oh, thank you, Ashleen. Thank you. And yeah, Maria says same. I thought he was a Libra rising, and yeah, Drake always came across as very Venusian. Now, if Drake was born a couple months late or a couple minutes later, he would be a Virgo rising, and therefore his ruler of ascendant, the ruler of his ascendant, Mercury, would be in a conjunction with Venus. Now that I could see, that I could really see. So that Leo rising at 29 degrees it's on the edge, it's on the very edge of Leo there. And if he was born a couple months later, he'd be a Virgo rising. And then that Mercury would be in a conjunction with his Venus. Yeah. And I agree with you. Maria, yeah, he always seems very Venusian to me in everything he does. Like, you know, certified lover boy, all the women on there pregnant and all that stuff with his album cover. And so anyway, those are some things about Drake's chart that I find interesting. And now I'm going to switch over to Kendrick's, and we'll come back to Drake's chart too. We're definitely not done with it yet. We still have a lot more to do here. But I want to go ahead and let me just stop my annotation. And I'm going to switch to Kendrick's chart, and we will start the annotation again. Okay, let's see. Sorry, guys. I always have to get my little stuff in a group here. Okay, so let's move on to Kendrick's chart. Now, Kendrick's chart is a little bit different here, okay? So Kendrick has less fire in his chart. You know, Drake is a Leo rising, so he comes across as King Drake or Drake who's on top or Drake who's the king of everything, right? Where Kendrick is actually a Libra rising, which I found very interesting. And the ruler of his ascendant is that Venus in Gemini. And that's going to be very important because talking about Drake's chart, both Drake and Kendrick have a lot of water in their chart. Both of them have a decent amount of water, but Drake has fire and Kendrick has air sign energy. And we can see the way that Kendrick is when he's writing. He's very, creative and quick with the comebacks. And he is just like a total virtuoso with the pen and the way that he comes up with things and comes up with rhymes and lyrics. And that Venus and Gemini really working overtime, really making a difference for him as an artist. And as an artist, being very lyrically gifted, Venus and Gemini. And so we're talking about two different people where Drake has his Venus in Scorpio. Drake also has his Mercury in Scorpio. Now, Kendrick, it's interesting because Drake will call Kendrick a motor mouth. Like he's always like, oh, he's a motor mouth, or Kendrick gets accused of being a motor mouth in a bad way, like by Drake, but it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? I mean, he is kind of a motor mouth, but he talks really fast, he raps really fast. barely get a word in edgewise because he's just going and going and going. And when we think about somebody who's a motor mouth or somebody who is just going off and being very competitive lyrically, being like calling people out in his lyrics and being hyper competitive that way, Kendrick's chart is a very different Mercury combination. So I showed you Drake where he has Mercury Venus and he raps about love and relationships and trust issues. Kendrick has his Mercury in the 10th house in Cancer, and it is in a conjunction with Mars in the part of fortune. Now, the part of fortune is this little circle with the X in the middle of it. And the part of fortune is a calculation point in the chart where we take the ascendant, the sun and the moon, and we do a calculation to come up with this very fortunate area where we can find happiness, we can find money, we can find natural gifts. It deals with our body and how we feel in our body, the part of fortune. So the part of fortune is there with his Mercury and Mars, which just tells me he's very comfortable lyrically, and he's very like profitable as well lyrically, and very comfortable with what he does lyrically. Now, the motor mouth aspect of Kendrick is going to be the Mercury-Mars conjunction. Now, that is where, if you have Mercury-Mars in your chart, and I have Mercury square Mars in my chart, so I kind of know how it is, and you can really get going and you can really get talking. And when you're fighting with someone, you can really get going on it. With the Mercury-Mars combination, it's like, I'm coming after you with this sword and you better watch out because I'm going to be the winner. Okay. Now, while Drake is over there rapping about Kiki, do you love me? Are you riding? Are you this? Are you down for me? Kendrick is over here going, big three? There's no big three. It's just big me, and so it's a different energy. And, Kendrick definitely comes across in his writings as being a lot more scrappy than Drake and a lot more competitive. And I have a quote actually from Kendrick that I think is really interesting, where he addresses Drake and he says, "Dear Aubrey," which is Drake's first name, "Dear Aubrey, I'm not crashing your party. I don't have a hating bone in my body. This has been a good exhibition of game," meaning we're showing like this is kind of fun because we're getting to flex and, throw game and lyrically do things. But this has been a good exhibition of game. But you fucked up the moment you called my family's name. Okay. So keep that in mind. Kendrick is telling Drake when they really started beefing, "I'm not crashing your party. I don't have a hating bone in my body. This has been a good back and forth. But the minute you mentioned my family, you fucked up." And that's when the insults really started coming hard. Now, of course, with, yeah, yep. And yep, Venus and Gemini definitely got the gift of gab, as we call it. And Maria says, "I feel like Drake wants to be likable, like Libras." Yeah, I do feel that too as well, Maria, that he really tries hard to be likable or belong. But yeah, it's a hard, whereas Kendrick, it seems like maybe, now Kendrick is the Libra rising. So people like him. He's definitely has more popularity and he's got more people on his, well, that's not necessarily true. Drake is very popular, but when it comes to peers and when it comes to other rappers and things like that, they're definitely like Kendrick more, is how I feel, from what I was reading and seeing and the opinions and everything. But even Barack Obama was like, Kendrick wins over Drake. And it's like, even Barack Obama said that? Geez, okay. But of course, Mars wants to be the winner. Okay. And Mercury-Mars conjunction in the war of the words, I will win. Mercury-Mars conjunction. And especially with Mercury in Cancer and Mars in Cancer. You fuck with my family or you start talking crap about my family and my kids and my wife, that's it. Now I'm taking it personal and now I'm coming after you. And so, whoa, right? Like that is really huge and really got personal. Now, when we see Cancer there is the funny thing is that Drake is accused of being too sensitive. We saw the moon in Cancer in the 12th house. He's too sensitive, he's too soft. But I also feel that Kendrick is also very sensitive and soft in a way as well. Kendrick has the moon in Pisces, okay? And there is a softness about him too, but he's like, I got mouths to feed, right? Mercury, Mars conjunction and Cancer. I got mouths to feed. I've got family to take care of. And I'm going to hustle hard. Okay. The Mercury Mars is the hustling hard verbally to come out on top. And you get the sense with Kendrick that he loves a good verbal competition, where I don't really feel it's the same for Drake. He's got the Mercury Venus conjunction. And, he's just like, hey, I got your girl, Kiki, do you love me? That type of thing. And, Kendrick is on Big Sean's 2013 song Control and is like, I'm here to bury you all and take all your fans. And he lists out a bunch of rappers who he'd like to beat competition wise in a verbal, one-on-one. And most other rappers were like, yeah, we love competition. This is cool. And they kind of like got into it. But Drake kind of took it really sensitively. And Garnet Goddess says, yes, that's why they call Drake the culture vulture. Interesting, right? The culture vulture. And yeah, so yes, I did read that. And so you can see Kendrick's chart is definitely more like battle with me. I'd love to battle with you. Let's get into it. Let's get into the war of the words, okay? And but before we go too much into Kendrick's chart on the Mercury Mars, I just want to mention a couple more things. Is that he's got more air sign energy. He's a Libra rising. He's got the sun in Gemini, Venus in Gemini. He's got more air energy than Drake. And so people think he's, more clever, that he's a better writer, that he's just a better rapper and a better writer, and that he flows like, his flow and everything is more complex and all of that. And the thing about Kendrick's chart that I will note, do you guys remember how I showed you the grand water trine in Drake's chart? Kendrick doesn't have any grand trines in his chart. And while Drake had a trine between the moon, Jupiter, and Venus, Drake has the moon square Saturn. Now, that is a very difficult aspect. And that's one of the reasons, and it's not the only reason, but for example, in Drake's chart, he's got the moon in Cancer, Jupiter in Pisces, very strong placements for both the moon and Jupiter. Okay. And he's got, like I said, in a grand trine with his Venus. Now, Kendrick doesn't have any of that in his chart. In fact, his moon is actually squaring Saturn, and it's not in a trine to Jupiter, and it's not in a trine to Venus. Now, I will say that his moon is in a trine to that Mercury and Mars, which we'll talk about a little bit later, which is great. But that moon is squaring his sun, and it is squaring Saturn. Particularly the moon square Saturn is a very, very tough aspect. And, where Drake has planets in his chart that are in, exaltation and domicile and things like that. Kendrick does not have that in his chart. Mars is actually in fall in Cancer. It's not a great position for Mars, and he has no planets in domicile or exaltation in his chart. And although the moon is pretty strong in Pisces, and that's a strong placement for the moon, it is in a bad house in the 6th house. And so It is in a difficult house. So that's one of the reasons why I say just looking at Kendrick's chart, I think that his chart is more difficult than Drake's chart, just like right out of the gate. And yeah, he also has the South Node rising on his ascendant or in his ascendant, and that moon square Saturn is really tough. And that talks about, you know, how Kendrick grew up in Section 8 housing in Compton, in poverty, you know, and the moon square Saturn can often talk about growing up in a difficult environment, in poverty, under bad conditions, and Kendrick actually wrote an album called Good Kid, Mad City, talking about how hard it was for him to try to like stay on the right path and try to do good in the world and get beyond all the temptations that were coming at him, and just how tough it was for him growing up and how he always was afraid of going back to Section 8 housing with his mother. And I think it's also interesting the way that they spend money, because as we saw in Drake's chart, the ruler of his second house of money was in a conjunction with Venus. So Drake likes to spend money and he likes to look good. Now, in Kendrick's chart, the ruler of his second house of money is the Mars, that Mars in fall in Cancer, and it is in a quincunx to Saturn, which is a difficult relationship with the Saturn in Sagittarius. Okay. So Kendrick actually has a song called Fear, where he talks about how he's afraid to spend money. Ruler of my second house, quincunx Saturn. I'm afraid to spend money. I'm afraid I'm going to lose everything that I worked for. Also, Kendrick talks a lot in his music about overcoming depression, dealing with anxiety, dealing with trauma. These are the things that Kendrick will talk about, and his internal struggle to maintain his goodness when he's growing up in an environment that is very unpredictable. We also see the moon square Uranus there too, a very unpredictable, challenging environment that he grew up with. Now, interestingly, Kendrick did grow up with his father. And he had, even though he grew up in that environment, he did have a constant father figure where Drake did not. And so I actually think, and you can see Drake or Kendrick has his sun in Gemini. And yeah, it's in a conjunction with Chiron. Not to say that he didn't have any difficulties with his father. But having the sun in the ninth house is very positive. That's much more positive than, for instance, we have with Drake, where he's got his sun square Mars in a conjunction with Pluto. And, you know, the whole thing of Kendrick having a father who was around probably helped him to understand himself better. Now, I think with the Gemini there, he had a lot of conflicting energies with his father, because his father had a job at KFC and worked at KFC, but his father, it wasn't enough to feed their family. So then he had to go to the streets and make money in the streets. And so there were these conflicting messages from his father and these conflicting ideas, which I think really shows with the Sun Chiron conjunction in Gemini, how he received these conflicting messages from his father. But at the same time, his father was actually around and actually there. And yeah, Garnet Goddess says, yes, scarcity mindset. I get that too at times. Yeah, you know, Kendrick growing up in Section 8 housing and poverty in a difficult environment, being afraid to spend his money and afraid to lose everything, where Drake's money is in a conjunction with Venus. And he's like, let's, you know, he's Mr. Champagne Poppy. He's Mr. spending that money on a yacht. You know, he's yacht daddy. He's Champagne Poppy. He's popping bottles. And Kendrick's like, I'm afraid to even spend my money or touch my money. Okay. And my money is in a quincunx with Saturn. I'm afraid to touch it. I'm afraid to spend it. And, you know, that whole thing, with, you know, having mouths to feed and not having enough money to have to be, you know, I've got mouths to feed. I can't just be spending money on all these different things. And you can see the ruler of his fifth house of children is also in a quincunx to that Mars in Cancer, that's ruling his second house of money. So it's like, I'm afraid I won't have enough money to provide for my children. And Kendrick has two kids and he's got plenty of money now, but that sense of fear of I won't be able to, you know, I've got hungry mouths to feed and I'm not going to have enough and I'll lose everything. And, you know, Moon is a very important planet in our chart. And when it squares Saturn, that can sometimes talk about feeling like a defeatist mindset or feeling like, oh boy, you know, everything's going to go wrong or everything's going to go bad or I'm afraid or I'm scared. So we can definitely kind of pick up that energy on Kendrick's chart. And like I mentioned, you know, he also has his Mercury in a I said he had his Mercury opposite Saturn, but he actually has his Mercury in a quincunx to that Saturn as well. And, you know, Mercury is, of course, speech. And Kendrick growing up had a stutter, actually. And, you know, and he's also talked a lot about how at times he gets intense writer's block. Like he said that he had intense writer's block for almost 2 years, actually. And so it's interesting with Kendrick's chart because he does have, like his Mercury is challenged by the Saturn, by the quincunx to Saturn, you know, having a stutter growing up, you know, like having writer's block, like not being able to write anything for 2 years because you have writer's block. That is very Mercury Saturn. And, you know, with his money, like I said, in the quincunx to Saturn, I'm afraid to spend my money. I'm afraid of losing everything that I've gained. And I've got hungry mouths to feed. I've got two kids and a wife. I've got hungry mouths to feed, you know, Mercury, Mars, and Cancer. And so I think that his chart does have more difficulties in it than Drake's chart. And that's why I think Drake annoys Kendrick as well. Because if you're a person that's been through a lot of difficulties and you've got another person over there going, started from the bottom, now we're here. And it's like, no, you didn't, you know, not really. And, you know, how about you get some real problems, right? So I kind of feel like there is that energy between him and Drake. They're very different artists. They come from very different place. And the things that they rap about are very, very different. And, so anyway, those are some things that I want to kind of point out. Now, we're going to switch back to Drake for a little bit here. And I'm going to erase and I'm going to stop annotating. And we are going to see, we're just going to be switching back and going back and forth. Now we're back on Drake again. So one thing Drake always gets associated with is the sneak diss, like sneaking in little sneaky disses. And I think that that is very Mercury Scorpio, you know, Mercury and Scorpio, like sneaking in the diss, right? Where we saw Kendrick's chart, he has a Mercury Mars conjunction. He's coming right at you with the sword. You know, there's no sneaking it in or pussyfooting around with Kendrick, but with Drake, it is the Mercury and Scorpio and it is the sneaky diss. And I think that also it irritates Kendrick in a way too, because it's like, don't be so sneaky with it. Just come out with it already, like with the Mercury Mars conjunction. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit how Drake's chart has quite a bit of fixed energy in it. Oh, sorry, that's my that's my puppy. She's playing with her toy. You might hear a couple of squeaks there. But anyway, in Drake's chart, Drake has a lot of fixed sign energy. So his ascendant is in Leo. He's got a ton of planets in Scorpio. His Mars is in Aquarius. A lot of fixed energy in his chart. Now, as we know, with fixed energy, once we get a momentum going, that energy is unstoppable. And Drake has been very like unstoppable with the way Like he has this, a hit machine maker that he just keeps making album after album, hit after hit after hit. But it's kind of the same thing over again. His voice is kind of the same. The topics are kind of the same. It is fixed sign energy. It's not really changing. His music isn't really changing all that much. And it might be kind of hard to see how he's evolved as an artist because he's kind of doing the same thing over and over again, but it's consistent. And it's just, hit after hit after hit, album after album. Whereas with Kendrick is more cardinal. So he has more cardinal and mutable energy in his chart, less fixed sign energy. And so with his creativity, I think Kendrick is more like stopping for a couple years because he has writer's block, kind of doing a lot and then stopping and pulling back and not as consistent, but really, really good when he does put something out. And I think you can see that energy in their charts because Drake is heavily fixed, entrenched energy, where Kendrick is more cardinal and mutable. He's like a bee buzzing around, and you can't get rid of him. And it's like, is he there? Is he over there? Is he up here? Is he down here? And Drake is just kind of doing one thing. And I think it's evident too in Drake's lyrics because Drake talks about like, no new friends, fuck a friend, where are your real friends? Okay. And I think that's an interesting song that he sings on, like, fuck fake friends, no new friends, who needs new friends? That's a very scorpionic type of a thing to say. And, fixed sign energy says, I'm going to stick with what I have here. I don't need new friends. I don't need a different type of music. I'm just going to, write about the same things and put out almost the same record every year. And yeah, it's going to be catchy and poppy with the Mercury Venus. It'll be catchy and poppy and fun, but it's not really going deeper, and, the Venus in Scorpio retrograde may talk about how Drake has a harder time going deeper as an artist. Now, you would think that is, Scorpio. So of course you're going to go deep. But I think with the retrograde, it can show maybe a resistance to kind of going deeper because sometimes when we go deeper, we're so afraid with what we're going to find there, Mercury and Cancer in the 12th house. If we go deeper into our emotions, that we're going to get lost in that world. And so we kind of keep everything surface level in a way because we don't want to get lost into that world. And so I really think Drake's chart is very fixed and entrenched in a lot of ways. Whereas if we look at Kendrick's chart and we see his chart again, we can see Kendrick is a little bit more all over the place. And he's got like, Libra is a cardinal sign. All the Gemini stuff is all mutable. Cancer is cardinal. Pisces moon, mutable. So his energy is more all over the place. And he's not as turning out hits, album after album after album as consistently maybe as Drake has over the years. But when he puts something out, it's really good and it's really thoughtful, and that's that air sign energy of being introspect with the water, right? Because he has a lot of water in his chart too, of being thoughtful and introspective. And then, also dealing with mental health issues with the moon square Saturn and the depression and the trauma that he's had and the growing up in the difficult environment. And, a lot of times creative artists, I can talk a little bit about it because my boyfriend's an artist and he has moon square Saturn in his chart. And a lot of artists that have that moon square Saturn likes to be very productive. And sometimes, the best thing that you can do is get a pen and paper and write down your thoughts and get things out on the page to kind of deal with your emotions. And I actually think Kendrick is a lot better at doing that. And maybe he's more comfortable with that. Let's look at Kendrick's chart. And I'm going to read you guys a quote that Kendrick made about when he was younger and how he would write about his feelings. And we're going to look at his chart because Kendrick, when he grew up, he was very introspective, quiet at times, um, especially as a young kid, shy, quiet, introspective. I think he came out of his shell, as he got a little bit older and became more talkative and social and all of that with the Libra rising and the Venus in Gemini. But his emotional nature, very sensitive as well. And it's funny because he's always telling Drake, oh, he's too soft or he's too sensitive. But Kendrick is also very sensitive too. But he battles with it on more of an internal level with the moon square Saturn, very introspective. And, Saturn is in Sagittarius, so very philosophical as well, very introspective and philosophical about life and, the whys and the big questions of life. But also, I want to read you guys this quote and show you the trine that Kendrick has from his moon to his Mercury. Now, keep in mind, in Drake's chart, he doesn't have a similar trine. Now, he has the moon trine Jupiter, trine Venus, lots of opportunities as an artist, lots of opportunities to get ahead, but his moon is tucked away in the 12th house, and his emotions are tucked away in that 12th house. Whereas with Kendrick, I'm going to read you a quote from him. Kendrick said, talking about growing up as a child and how he had all these feelings and emotions, moon in Pisces. He put, as a child, he could write and put down all his feelings on a sheet of paper. Okay, all my feelings going on a sheet of paper. Moon in Pisces, trine Mercury in Cancer. All my feelings are going onto a sheet of paper. And when I put my feelings down on a piece of paper, my feelings made sense to me, and I liked that. That is the power of a Mercury trine the moon, okay? And for a writer, that is really, really key, right? Because you want to be able to tap into your emotions and you want to be able to get your emotions out on paper. Now, he's got a lot of, emotional disturbances with the moon square Saturn, but having that outlet of the moon trine Mercury helps him to get those emotions and feelings out, and he's able to flow and he's able to get it out there. Now, Drake does not have such a thing in his chart. So here we see where Kendrick clearly has an advantage in this area of being, and with the Mercury in Cancer as well, talk about the ability to be personal and vulnerable and exposed in what you're writing and doing. And Kendrick does give a lot of personal vulnerability in his work and in his writing. And whereas for Drake, that sensitive moon in Cancer is locked away in the 12th house. And so there's not as much, willingness for emotional vulnerability with Drake. And Maria says, I have Saturn in the 4th. I've always been introspective, especially when I was younger. Yeah, Maria, yeah, that is, and the 4th house often talks about how we grow up. I mean, the 1st house too, for sure, like our experiences in our early environment growing up, but the 4th house in particular too. And yeah, the moon square Saturn, very introspective. And, Kendrick Lamar oftentimes like wrestles with big themes, Saturn and Sagittarius, okay, big philosophical themes of good versus evil, religion, right versus wrong, duties and responsibilities to others. And, Kendrick talked about growing up, about how growing up, he would often take the blame for things, and he would often feel very responsible for things going on in his family that were not actually his fault. Now, that's a very moon in Pisces square Saturn and Sagittarius, like put the blame on me. I'll take it. It's that sacrificial Pisces energy, that Christ-like energy of I'll take it, put the blame on me, dump all your shit on me. And, it's interesting because Kendrick's family growing up would call him man, like for little man. And a lot of times with Moon Saturn, you're far more mature than your age actually shows you to be. And, call him like his parents and the people around him would call him like a little man and call him man. And I think that that is very Moon-Saturn. But when you're expected to kind of carry all those emotions and what to do with all those emotions and be the like strong little man growing up, yeah, it can create some emotional disturbances. And certainly Kendrick has had those as well. I think it's very interesting because Michael Jackson also in his chart has the moon in Pisces square Saturn in Sagittarius, interestingly. And oftentimes in these arguments between Kendrick and Drake, Michael Jackson is getting brought up all the time. And it's funny because Drake has a Sun Pluto conjunction like Michael Jackson, and people are accusing him of being a pedophile and talking to young women, underage women, trafficking, very much similar to the way with Michael Jackson with his Sun Pluto conjunction, how Michael Jackson was, looked at and, pedophile, these types of things, same type of energy coming up. And with Kendrick Lamar, Michael Jackson also had Moon in Pisces square Saturn and Sagittarius in his chart. Kendrick Lamar has the very same aspect and was like this little man growing up. And Michael Jackson also talked about growing up in the Jackson 5, about how he always had to be this like little man and he didn't really get a childhood. And so it's funny because I feel like Kendrick and Drake are always throwing Michael Jackson references at each other, and in their charts, they have similar aspects to Michael Jackson. So I think that's kind of ironic in a lot of ways. But anyway, so we can see in Kendrick's chart how, Moon square Saturn, very challenging, very difficult aspect, but he also has the Moon trine Mercury, very wonderful for a writer. Very, very nice, very wonderful for a writer. And as we know, Kendrick Lamar is the only rapper to win a Pulitzer Prize for his album. Like, that's a big deal. And, the Venus in Gemini in the ninth house. Now, the ninth house is a very Dharma filled, wonderful house. It is all about action, doing right action in the world, and following your dharma and following your truth in the world. And by expressing himself as an artist, Venus in Gemini, and being with the word, with how good he is with words, he won a Pulitzer Prize. So that is pretty freaking amazing that he won that. And so anyway, we've got Kendrick's chart there, and let's see if there's anything else I wanted to, Kendrick with the water air emphasis in his chart coming off as intelligent, thoughtful, emotionally vulnerable, etc. Where Drake having water fire is, especially his water is in Scorpio. So he's coming off, especially with the Leo rising, coming off more status oriented or revenge oriented. Well, not even revenge oriented, because I would say in a lot of ways that Kendrick is more feisty with the Mercury Mars conjunction. But Drake is a little bit of a mystery, with that scorpionic energy on the bottom of his chart. You just don't really know what's going on there. And it brings a lot of questions about his authenticity into question. And let's see what else we want to talk about. Okay. And yeah. So, I did mention they both have their moon and water signs. They're both actually sensitive and introspective. Like, Drake talks about, I think Drake just hides it better. I think there probably is a side of him that is like, well, damn, but doesn't want to share it and doesn't trust enough to share it because he probably has been made fun of or he feels like he doesn't belong. So he doesn't want to share it. Whereas Kendrick is just more out there with it, I think. And they both have water sign moons. They both have sensitive, emotional, introspective, sides to them, and both mentioned that they were quiet observers growing up. So that is interesting. Drake is trying to hide his sensitivity with the moon in his 12th house, where Kendrick has his moon in the 6th house, and he is openly vulnerable but challenged by his circumstances in life. So very different energy there. And oh my gosh, Maria. Yeah, Edgar Allan Poe had his moon in Pisces and Sagittarius Saturn too. Fun fact. I love that. I love that. Also, one thing I want to bring up on Kendrick's chart too is, he's got this moon in the 6th house square the Saturn in the 3rd house. In Vedic astrology, which is something I've studied as well, the 3rd house, the 6th house, the 10th, and the 11th house are called Upachaya houses. And they're houses that have to do with our growth in life. And they may start out difficult, but over time, they have the ability to grow and to prosper. And I think it's interesting with his moon square Saturn there in those Upachaya houses, showing like, yes, it's a challenging environment growing up. Yes, it is hard. But over time, he grows and he has the ability to grow emotionally and become better. And I mean, I think Drake does too. I feel he hides an awful lot and compartmentalizes and puts a lot off into the corner. Whereas I don't know if Kendrick really has the luxury of that so much in his chart, because for him to access his creativity, he really needs to go for it in a very Martian type of a way. That Mars is really critical there. And anyway, so it's so funny with Kendrick because, that moon in Pisces is very interesting. We talked about that sacrificial kind of energy. And I wanted to show you guys the, so this is Kendrick, right? This is his album cover, Damn. But I also wanted to show you guys his, I wanted to show you, let's see if it will, where did all my other things go? Oh, shoot. Anyway, I was going to show you guys, there's a picture of Kendrick with a crown of thorns on his head, like Jesus. And I wanted to show you guys, that picture. It's very moon in Pisces, right? Because of course, Jesus, Pisces, the crown of the crown of thorns around the head. Kendrick has that going on there with that moon in Pisces. That is very apropos. And I also and Kendrick also in one of his songs, Humble, he says, I'm so tired of the Photoshop. Show me something real. Okay. And I also think that's very moon square Saturn. Show me something real. I'm so tired of the Photoshop. I can't take the fakeness anymore. So that is where Drake is like, I'm popping bottles and meeting models. It's a very different energy between these two. And the other thing that I want to point out before we start getting into their synastry and why they really don't like each other that much is what I want to show you guys is about Kendrick's partner and wife. So we can see the ruler of the 7th house is the Mars, as the Aries is on the cusp of the 7th house. So we would look to that Mars in Cancer to represent his love, his partner, his relationship. And what's interesting is his wife is showing up in his 10th house of career. And I found out that his wife actually performed on his album, Mr. Moral and the Hot Steppers. And she was on like 4 different songs, and she did some like vocal speaking tracks. And so it's interesting with Kendrick because he has his wife kind of ingrained in his career, and him and his wife were actually childhood sweethearts and high school sweethearts. And he ended up marrying her and having 2 kids with her. And she has had a major impact on his career. You can see the ruler of his 7th house of partnerships is in his 10th house of career. And so his wife has been collaborating with him, has collaborated with him on some album covers and songs and different things like that. But he said about his wife that she's the one person that can call him out, and she's the one person that can really bring him back down to earth, and that she was, the only person that really believes in him when he's really down, that she's there for him and believes in him. And yeah, and it's interesting because Kendrick's the best planet because he is a day chart. His best planet is going to be this Jupiter in Aries. And Jupiter is falling in his seventh house of partnerships. And to me, that really talks about the positive motivation that his wife has gifted to him in this lifetime. So the reason why I'm bringing up Kendrick's wife so much is because she's up there with him in his 10th house of career, encouraging him, helping him, showing up on album covers with him. But the reason why I really want to bring her up a lot is because Drake's diss to Kendrick was very bad, or not very, I mean, both of them were going at each other's throats, but the diss that Drake took at Kendrick must have really been hard on him in a lot of ways, because what he did is Drake dissed Kendrick by coming out and saying that Kendrick's wife has infidelity issues, and that his second child, Kendrick's second child, is actually the child of another man's, and that he has assaulted his wife before. So, I mean, those are some pretty serious allegations that Drake threw over to Kendrick. Now, I gave you guys that quote earlier where Kendrick was saying, hey, man, it's all in good fun and I love the competition, but if you fuck with my family, you're going to get it. And, what he did is he really said some shit about his wife and family and kids. And we can see, his wife is showing up as that Mars and Cancer in his 10th house. And Drake really pointing at that, or really taking issue with that sensitivity there of, I'm not going to stand for that. Like, you fuck with my family, then you're really going to get it. And so we see this issue coming up, and that must have really upset, Kendrick a lot, because his wife is, so important from him for what he's, talked about her in interviews and things like that. Like, she's been a very important figure in his life. And you see Drake going right after that. And so you can see that there's a very sensitive spot there. And they hit each other's sensitive spots. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. And yeah, Symmetry, you're here. Oh my God, this is for you, my love. This whole thing is for you. And yes, you're welcome, Symmetry. You're welcome. And Maria says he probably got a BBL too. Symmetry says BBL Drizzy, LOL, BBL. So yeah. So anyway, that's why those insults about his wife and family must have felt incredibly personal. And of course, that is when Kendrick really went on the attack. So I did want to bring that up a little bit and talk about that. Now, I talked about Drake with his father and how his father wasn't around. We mentioned that. And I just want to show you guys a couple quick things on Drake's chart before we get into their synastry and look at why they really hate each other. So let me actually do Drake's chart one more time here. And I am going to annotate. And so here we're back to Drake's chart again. And I mentioned before about the difficult relationship with his father, with the Sun-Pluto conjunction. And I think Drake maybe he does have a difficult relationship with men in general. We can see that the Sun in Scorpio is squaring the Mars in Aquarius, okay? And that Mars is also squaring the Pluto as well. So we can see this is a difficult aspect in his chart. And when I'm talking about the father, we can talk about the sun, because the sun represents father, moon represents mother. And, he has very positive feelings for his mother. The moon is trine Jupiter. The moon is trine Venus. He's got very positive things to say about his mother. I think Drake does say nice things about his father, but I actually feel he could have a lot of hidden resentment and anger towards his father. And particularly in the branch of astrology that I study, medieval astrology, the fourth house is actually associated with the father, and representing the foundation of the family, and the start of the family and all of that. So in the branch of astrology that I've studied, the fourth house is the ruler of the fourth house really gives you the information that you're looking for about the father. And so the ruler of that fourth house is the Mars in Aquarius, as Scorpio is on the cusp of the fourth. And so that fourth house ruler is in a square to Pluto. And not only that, the sun is there too, squaring that same fourth house ruler. So I actually feel Drake has a lot of buried resentment towards his father. Now, as I mentioned, his mother's Jewish and white. His father is a Black man from Memphis who was a drummer and used to drum like for Jerry Lee Lewis, and knew a bunch of other famous musicians. So his father was a musician. His father is a musician. His father's still alive. But at some point, his father left his mother in Toronto to go live back in Memphis. And eventually, he said he would drive up and visit Drake during the summertime and bring him back to Memphis. But then there was a period of time when his father was in prison for dealing drugs. And Drake so Drake grew up with having a parent in prison. And anyone who grows up that has a parent that's incarcerated, there is a lot of shame with that. And there is a lot of, pain associated with that. And, even if the child doesn't really want to admit that to themselves, and it still can be there, I know, because unfortunately, my nephew grew up with, his father in jail. And, sometimes my nephew would ask you things that would break my heart. Like, am I a bad person because my father's anyway, I won't go too much into it, but, growing up and having a parent who's incarcerated, and you would think because Kendrick grew up, in a much rougher environment, that his father would have been incarcerated. But Kendrick's father worked at KFC, and he did do some stuff on the streets, but I don't think he had incarceration. And if he did, it wasn't a more long-term incarceration or more often incarceration that Drake's father had. Now, I think he has a lot of buried resentment towards his father, and he does talk about how his father wasn't around. Now, the thing I don't like about Drake's father, this is the thing I do not like. And this could be a reason for a lot of Drake's emotional problems, is that when his father is on TV talking about Drake, his attitude is, oh, I wish Drake would stop saying that. I wasn't an absent father. I was around. How can you be around when you live in a different country and also you go to prison for selling drugs? How can you be around all the time? Okay, so that statement irritated me from his father. And his father's on TV saying, oh, I was around, Drake talking about me being gone and how it hurt him at times. Like, that's BS. I was around. And when I asked Drake, hey, why are you telling people that I wasn't around when you were growing up? He said that Drake told him that he said that about his father because, hey, dad, it sells records. And I'm like, is that fucking true or not? Okay, because you can't live in another country and be in jail for selling drugs and be like, oh, I'm around all the time as a father. No, you're not. And second of all, you're making your son sound like a piece of shit because you're on TV saying, oh, Drake is lying. I was around. And the only reason he is saying that is to sell records. So basically, as a father, you're going on TV to say that your son is a fraud, he's a liar, he's not telling the truth, I think that that is bullshit, pure bullshit, okay? And I would not be surprised with that Sun-Pluto conjunction in Scorpio in the fourth house if there was some buried resentment or buried anger towards the father because of the way that that situation has been talked about and handled. And you know, that to me, when his father went on and was talking like that, to me, the narcissism bells were just going off. Now, you know, a lot of times it can be hard for a child to admit, you know, my parent doesn't care about me like I think they do. My parent is throwing me under the bus. My parent doesn't give a shit about me. Moon and Cancer in the 12th house, okay? Family secrets, family shit doesn't get talked about. It gets shoved down underneath the rug. Nobody mentions it. There's hidden anger. There's hidden resentment. The truth isn't coming out. Okay. And for Drake, it just becomes this big fuck you of, I got the money, I got the power, haha, motherfuckers, you know, and that's a very scorpionic thing to kind of want revenge and to be on top. And you can't tell me shit. I've got my money, fuck you. But at the end of the day, there are those issues of buried resentment and buried anger. Ruler of the fourth house, Mars and Aquarius square Pluto. Now, it's also interesting with Drake's chart that he oftentimes gets accused of being very mysterious, having weird mob ties to the mob, and that he's involved in criminal rings and gambling and all that stuff. It's very Sun, Pluto, and Scorpio, square Mars and Aquarius. It's very much like, you know, are you involved in criminal activity? His father, ruler of the fourth house, square Pluto, definitely involved in criminal activity, definitely went to prison. Okay. And my whole thing is, you know, his dad and him, Drake seems to behave positively towards his father. But to me, I don't like that. Like, I only saw a few interviews with the dad, and I was like, already, I don't like that. I don't like that, because why are you going on TV and insinuating that your son's a piece of shit and a liar? And so I think that, you know, that would be an interesting record for Drake to rap about. My father's a piece of shit. My father is a fucking liar. You know, that would be an interesting record for him to finally full blown come out and really put that Mars square Pluto to good use, and really, you know, really crank it out in a way that is just revealing the deep secrets and all this bullshit and everything that happened, and really just lay it out on the table. But I don't know, you know, I don't know if we're going to get something like that from Drake. I don't know if that type of record, he's ever going to come out with that. But anyway, I just had to bring up that thing about the father, because it may be the root of a lot of Drake's emotional problems, is what I think. And his ability, like, you know, Kendrick is married. They're both in their late 30s. Not to say everyone needs to be married. Anyway, I'm not married. I'm in my 40s. Who cares? I don't have kids. Who cares? But it's an interesting thing because, you know, Kendrick has 2 children and is married and has this family life. And Drake hasn't really, Drake has a kid. He has a son, but they're not together. And she was, you know, an adult film star that he got with, and then she ended up having a baby. That's fine, whatever. But like, you know, a lot of people have said Drake hasn't even had a real relationship. He's singing about relationships all the time and trust issues, but he hasn't even had like a real adult relationship for over 10 years. And so it's kind of interesting. And, you know, psychologically, Drake's chart has its challenges too. I don't mean to mean like Kendrick's chart is beating Drake's in level of difficulty. They both have their challenges and they both have their difficulties. So I wanted to point out that, because I don't like the father. I don't like that type of way that he was talking. I don't think it's right. Okay. And, but anyway, let me go ahead and show you guys the Synastry chart. So this is probably what you're really interested in, is why do these two hate each other so much, right? Now that we've like dissected their charts and looked at how they're different and how they're the same, then the question may be like, why do they hate each other so much? And part of it is because they are so different and they're completely different artists, but we need to kind of look at their synastry. So I think you guys are going to find this to be very interesting. Now, first things first, I want to point out, so synastry in astrology is when we take Drake's chart here. So Drake's chart is on the inside ring, and then Kendrick's chart is in the outside ring. So we've taken their charts and we've overlapped them together, and we're looking at how their planets are interacting together as an energy together, okay? So first things first, I want to look at this stuff right here, okay? Because now, as we mentioned, we talked in great detail about Drake's moon in Cancer in the 12th house and those locked up emotions and energy and feeling emotional, feeling sensitive, not feeling anything at all. We talked about that with Drake, but I think it's very interesting that all of Kendrick's Cancer planets are in a conjunction with Drake's moon in Cancer. So this is right where my eyes went right away. First things first, when I was looking at their synastry, because I'm like, those Cancer planets are connecting. Now, it's interesting in one of Kendrick's lyrics, he talks about tucking a sensitive wrapper back into pajama clothes. And he's talking about Drake, saying Drake is the sensitive wrapper, moon in Cancer, that he tucked into his pajama clothes. Moon in Cancer in the 12th house of sleep. Okay, you're the sensitive wrapper that I put in your pajama clothes and I tucked you away into the 12th house. So it's funny to me that Kendrick said that, because it's like, okay, yeah, your Mars in Cancer came, your Mars at 17 degrees Cancer came there and attacked Drake's, moon in Cancer, and your Mars attacked his moon, and you tucked a sensitive wrapper in his pajama clothes back into bed into his 12th house. I'm like, that is too on point right there. So with the, with the Mars moon conjunction, we see Kendrick's Mars on top of Drake's moon. Okay. And keep in mind that Kendrick has the Mercury Mars conjunction in his 10th house of career, where Drake's 12th house is the moon, and it's the 12th house for him with the moon in Cancer. Okay, so the Mars in Cancer is going to try to dominate over that sensitive moon in Cancer. Also, Kendrick coming at Drake, basically telling him, you have a secret child, you have a secret daughter that you've told no one about. Okay, so Kendrick really putting the pressure on Drake's 12th house, on that sensitive moon in Cancer, and telling him, calling him out and saying, you have a secret child that you've told no one about. Okay, and Kendrick's Mars just grinding on that moon in Cancer in the 12th house. Okay, and of course, Mars wants to win. Also, Mars is an instigator. Now, what's interesting is in the past, as I was reading their interviews from 2013, 2014, it kind of seems like Kendrick was more of the instigator, like that he was kind of poking Drake and was like, poke, 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 poke. And then Drake in his interviews would be like, he'd be like, like that just kind of brushing it off and kind of like not really wanting to get involved. And it actually was J. Cole, the first person shooter song that J. Cole did that Drake was singing on, that kind of revived the energy again back in October. But it seems like most of the kind of antagonism, at least initially, was coming from Kendrick. And that's that Mars energy of, I win, I'm the winner, ha ha, ha ha ha. That is the very step to me kind of, and even in first person shooter, when they were talking about being the big three, like that's kind of a compliment actually to Kendrick. It's like I guess Kendrick sees himself as above Drake, but it's like, it wasn't even a direct diss, really. It's like we're the big three, like we're the big three names in rap. And then Kendrick comes back with a much harder diss. Okay. So we see that Mars dominating force. I want to win. Okay. That is Mars. and you see it like, and it's hitting that Cancer energy for both of them. And that's how the disses started to get very personal. And they started attacking each other's families. And Cancer, of course, is a sign of, vulnerability, families, children, families, kids. Like they just started going in on each other's families big time. Basically Kendrick wrote in one of his songs, Meet the Grams, he wrote a little verse for each member of Drake's family. And then Drake comes back and insults, his wife, okay, and his family, and says one of his kids is illegitimate. So you've got this back, and it's Cancer energy, they're attacking each other's families. And, Kendrick is looking like the winner. And he's the one that is the Mars person in the situation, probably driving it more, maybe instigating it more, and maybe pushing the beef, maybe even more, being the one to kind of push it even more. So you can see that already. Yeah, Kendrick also rapped, I'm an old school Gemini or something like that. Hilarious. Yeah, and Kendrick is, that Venus in Gemini, like I'm an old school Gemini, like I'm gonna tell, I'm a motor mouth, I'm gonna write a million things about you, I'm gonna gossip about you, that's very Gemini. And yeah, this sensitivity of I'm going after your family, you're going after mine. It's very Cancer energy. A lot of people saying Kendrick is coming out the winner. He's the Mars energy in the situation. Mars is trying to be the winner. Also, Kendrick has Jupiter in Aries, and that Jupiter in Aries is squaring all of this stuff going on right here. Now, it is a square, but Jupiter is the most positive planet in Kendrick's chart, according to Sect. And so I think that Jupiter is also helping him out and motivating him to just put out a shit ton of stuff and really confidently put Drake on blast. And Drake is kind of the moon in Cancer, kind of hiding out a little bit more. And I kind of feel like with Drake, he feels like he has to do something or he'll be looked at as like, I don't know, for lack of a better word, he'll be looked at as a pussy. You guys know what I mean. But he'll be looked at as not doing anything. And so he comes out with something, but Kendrick is being read as the, Martian winner of it all. And so we've got that energy going on. And yeah, Cringe says the Cancer energy is also so territorial. Kendrick and his wrote about how Drake tries to make money off the Black American experience, but Drake is Canadian. Yeah, yes, it is. You're right. You're right, Cringe. Cancer is very much the tribe vibe, and it is very territorial. So, he's attacking Drake, and he's hitting Drake right in that moon in Cancer, where he probably already feels like he doesn't belong, and he probably already feels like shit. You know what I mean? So he's hitting him right in that zone. And, if we were playing Battleship, it'd be like, you sunk my battleship. Okay. Mars and Cancer on top of Moon and Cancer, you sunk my battleship. Okay. And, yeah. So Maria, we'll talk about that Jupiter North Node in a minute here as well. And I also want, and because the moon is in Cancer in Drake's 12th house, Drake doesn't see it as a friendly competition. Because I think Kendrick, at first with the Mars-Mercury conjunction, Kendrick wrote about seeing it as like a friendly, like, exchanging barbs, kind of verbal competition, Mercury Mars conjunction. Whereas I don't feel like Drake sees it that way, really. I mean, feelings got hurt pretty much there. And I think with the moon in the 12th house for Drake, I think he feels blindsided, confused, attacked. And of course, the 12th house is the house of secret enemies. And, Drake has got that moon in the 12th house, got a lot of enemies. He sings that song, I've got a lot of enemies, got a lot of enemies, right? And, coming up on that, probably leaving him feeling kind of blindsided, confused, and attacked. When people's Mars are attacking our 12th house, it's like, I am very like, why are you attacking me, right? Like, I'm very blindsided, I'm very confused. Your Mars is attacking my 12th house and my moon. The moon in the chart, the moon is about, here's what I wrote. The moon is about as personal as you can get when insulting someone. Okay. If you're going after someone's moon, like that is the most insulting you can possibly get. And, the Mars in Cancer on top of the moon in Cancer, personally insulting your family. Ooh, that is a tough one. That is a tough one. So we have, in Symmetry, they have some past life beef. Yes, you rightly saw this right here for the past life beef, and we will talk about that too. So, yep. Now, the next thing I want to mention is the Venus in Gemini, okay? So here's the next thing in their synastry that is tough, okay? So Kendrick, we talked about how he's a Libra rising. So Venus is the ruler of his ascendant, very important planet for him, one of the most important planets in his chart, that Venus in Gemini, okay? Now, in Drake's chart, that his Saturn in Sagittarius in Drake's chart is directly opposing Kendrick's Venus, okay? So Kendrick has Venus in Gemini, and Drake's Saturn is in direct opposition to Kendrick's Venus, okay? So Kendrick Venus, Drake Saturn, opposition to each other, okay? So that is a tough one because here is the crux of the question between these two, okay? Because Venus represents artists, right? And Gemini represents writing your own music, being lyrical, having, something to say, all of that. Opposite Drake's Saturn. And the question we're asking ourselves here is, what is a serious artist, right? And Saturn is about taking things seriously. And, you'd almost think the roles would be reversed, that Drake's Venus would be opposing Kendrick's Saturn, and Kendrick would be saying, are you a serious artist, to Drake, right? But I think the question is there between them. And Saturn can also represent disrespect. So it's like, I don't respect you as an artist, okay? And the thing is that Venus in Gemini that Kendrick has is showing up in Drake's house, 11th house of friends. So Drake is kind of looking at Kendrick as a friend. And at first they were friends and they did collaborate with each other. And they did collaborate on each other's albums back in the day. And they were actually friends, and that Venus showing up in the 11th house of Drake looks at him like, oh, that was my friend, Venus in Gemini. But this friend is being two-faced, Venus in Gemini, and hates me. So that's how Drake is looking at it. But the Venus opposite Saturn between the charts is asking the question mark, what is a serious artist? Okay. Is Drake a serious artist or not? He's having people ghostwrite for him. It might not even be his lyrics. And the whole thing of, I don't feel respected as an artist, okay? Or I don't feel like I'm getting what's due to me as an artist, and you are, right? So it's this Venus-Saturn issue. And I will also say too, that not only were they insulting each other's families, but they were insulting each other others, people like, you know, Drake was insulting Kendrick's wife. Okay. And, you know, Venus represents relationships. So Kendrick's relationships, opposite Drake's Saturn. I am insulting your wife. I am insulting your relationship. And a lot of the beef has been about the way that they treat women. And, you know, some feminist writers have come out and said, hey, this whole thing is a piece of shit because, you know, one is saying that they domestically abuse their wife. The other one is saying they're a pedophile. They're insulting each other's women. They're insulting each other's families. Leave the women and the children out of it. Like, be a fucking man. Don't sit here and talk about each other's women and children. Okay. And that's what we see with that Cancer energy too, of getting way too personal, getting way too entrenched and personal. And I like what you said about being territorial as well, cringe. Like, that is very true. Like, getting very territorial and also accusing each other of treating your women badly, okay, or of mistreating women, Venus opposite Saturn. So that's a huge thing too, in the way that Kendrick doesn't like the way that Drake treats women. Okay, Kendrick's Venus opposite Drake's Saturn in the 5th house. Okay, Drake thinks they're friends. Kendrick is being, in a way, he's being a little bit of a Gemini because he had this whole lyric about how, hey, I don't have a hating bone in my body, but once you insulted my family, now I'm coming for you. But then he came out with this song called I'm the biggest hater. I hate the way that you walk. I hate the way that you talk, right? And it's like, okay, you said you didn't have a hating bone in your body, but now you're saying you hate everything about this person, the way they walk, the way they talk, everything. So that's very Gemini too. It's like one point you say, I don't have any hate towards you, but you insulted my family, so now I'm pissed. Versus, I hate everything about you. I hate the way you walk. I hate the way you talk. So that's a kind of Gemini little kind of two-faced thing going on there with Kendrick, which may come out sometimes. But I think the Venus opposite Saturn is a question. What is a serious artist? And do we respect each other as artists or not? You know, that's the question. And, you know, dragging each other for each other's relationships. And, you know, Saturn really, like, Kendrick looks at Drake's Saturn. His Venus looks at Drake's Saturn and he says, I hate this motherfucker. He brings me down. And, you know, Saturn can be like a hateful, evil, rancid attitude. There's a reason in traditional astrology why oppositions have the nature of Saturn and they're associated with an aspect of pure hatred, like in traditional astrology. And so it's like Kendrick is showing up in Drake's 11th house as a friend, but the Saturn opposition is saying, like, this friendship is not going to work out or it's going bad. All right. And, you know, what does it mean to be a serious artist and a mature artist, right? Venus opposite Saturn. And so that's another thing that isn't working. And I think, you know, because Venus is showing up in Drake's 11th house, Drake is like, hey, man, I thought we were friends, right? The 11th house is a house of friendship. But Kendrick is seeing the worst in Drake. You know, he's looking at Drake's Saturn. So he's seeing the worst in him and he's like, I fucking hate you, you know? So we've got that energy going on with the Venus Saturn opposition. Now, and then Drake is firing back and shooting his Saturn dart at Kendrick's Venus and saying, your marriage is fraudulent. Your wife had a baby with another man, you know, really, you know, that type of thing too. So Drake is also firing that Saturn and Sagittarius arrow at Kendrick's Venus in Gemini. So that is going on there too. Now, it's interesting because the Venus is in Gemini and the Saturn is in Sagittarius. And what we see here is we have opposing views as artists, right? Venus opposite Saturn. We've got opposing views as artists. We don't see eye to eye artistically. And in Gemini and Sagittarius, planets are in search for the truth. Okay. So it's like we're searching for the truth here. but we bring out the worst in each other artistically, and I mean, some would say they bring out the best in each other artistically too, because they're coming up with these amazing rhymes and raps and everything. But at the end of the day, like, you're saying hurtful things you're hurting people too. So yeah, anyway, in searching for the truth, we don't see eye to eye artistically in searching for the truth, and we can bring out the worst or see the worst in each other artistically. Okay. And anyway, so that is something going on with the Venus Saturn. Now, the next thing that I want to point out in this chart is I want to point out the North Node Jupiter. Okay. So Drake has the North Node at 20 degrees Aries. Okay. And Kendrick has the Jupiter in Gemini at 23 degrees in Aries. So I'm pointing out this Jupiter North Node conjunction. Now, one thing Drake said about this particular beef is he said, I got him to create more for his fans. So Drake is basically saying, I motivated him. Okay. I motivated him to create more art for his fans. So, you can thank me later, right? Hey, Kendrick, thank me later, because I guess me just being a presence out here in the world got you so mad that it motivated you to create more work for your fans. Now, what I wrote down about, the interesting thing about that Jupiter in Aries in Kendrick's chart is it's the most positive planet for him. And it is it is in his seventh house of partnerships. And I talked about earlier about how his wife really motivates him to like be a better person and kick bad habits and want to try and want to do better in life. Okay. Now, Drake's North Node, Rahu in Aries, is on Kendrick's Jupiter. And, Rahu in Aries is a swift kick in the ass. So, Rahu is highly ambitious, highly direct, highly going after your shit. Okay. And because you've got Drake's Rahu in Aries on Kendrick's Jupiter, I really think his whole statement about, well, at least I, motivated you to create more art for your fans, because it's been a while since we've heard from you. And we talked about earlier about how Kendrick gets writer's block with the Mercury Quincunx Saturn and all of that. But Drake's like, hey, man, at least I motivated you to create more art for your fans. And that Rahu in Aries in a conjunction with his Jupiter, that Rahu is a big kick in the butt. It's like, let's go. And so, Drake just being there in some way somehow motivates Kendrick to create more art, which is good for him in a way. And now it's interesting because Kendrick also has his North Node in Aries. Now, when I was looking at their dates of birth, Drake was born a little bit before Kendrick. So he's a little bit older than Kendrick. And so it's interesting because Drake's the one that's a little bit older. They both have their Saturns in Sagittarius. They both have, Rahu and Aries because they're both born, within a year of each other. So they've got some similar placements. However, I want to talk a little bit about the eclipses that we've been having in Aries and Libra, because Drake and Kendrick both have Rahu and Ketu, the North Node and South Node, in Aries and Libra. And of course, since October of 2023, well, actually since April of 2023, but in October of 2023, we had an eclipse and in Libra. Okay. So, it's interesting. And then now at the end of March, we had the full moon lunar eclipse in Libra. In early April, we had we had the new moon solar eclipse in Aries. So for the last 6 months, we've been having eclipses right now in Aries and Libra. Now, what I think is so interesting about this whole beef that basically got reignited in October of 2023, a decade after it originally started, when things had been relatively quiet between them, is right when that October eclipse hit. So this is an Aries Libra eclipse story, my friends. And the eclipse originally that offset it, the one in October of 2023, was the song First Person Shooter that J. Cole did when he called Kendrick himself and Drake the big three in rap. Now, Kendrick didn't come back with a reply until March 22nd of 2024, which is 3 days before the lunar eclipse in Libra at 5 degrees Libra, which would have been 2 degrees off of Kendrick's south node in Libra, 2 degrees off from it, basically on top of Kendrick's south node in Libra. Okay, so Kendrick doesn't fire back until March, when that full moon lunar eclipse in Libra happened. Now, after Kendrick, fired back in March to the diss that happened in October, Kendrick fired back in March, then Drake starts going crazy in early April around the solar eclipse in Aries time, when there was a solar eclipse at Aries at 19 degrees Aries, and Drake has his north node at 20 degrees Aries, okay? He starts firing back at Kendrick during the April solar eclipse. And this has just been pinging back and forth during all, towards the end of March and all of April and even into early May, just going back and forth, back and forth. And what we see here is we see an eclipse story happening for these two very intimately. Now, again, I find it interesting because Kendrick actually has Jupiter in Aries, okay? So Jupiter, of course, is the planet of growth and abundance. And, Jupiter in Aries, and actually Drake doesn't have any other planets in Aries. He only just has the North Node in Aries. But Kendrick has Jupiter in Aries, the best planet in his chart, according to Sect. And so again, Kendrick is coming out the winner. His Mars is dominating over Drake's moon in Cancer, but his Jupiter in Aries is also stealing the show during this entire eclipse time as well. So you can see there is something very interesting going on with their north and south nodes and all these eclipses. And it's funny to me because the times when Kendrick was firing on Drake, the eclipses were happening on Kendrick's nodes. And when Drake was firing on Kendrick, the eclipses were happening exactly on Drake's nodes. And so this is epic. This is epic astrology happening in real time, actually. And anyway, so this is very, very interesting. And Symmetry said, so much suppressed darkness coming to light. Wow. Cringe says, the way J. Cole embodied Libra and stepped out and apologized. Yeah, that is very much the way he just stepped out of it and said, I don't need to be a part of this. And actually, I saw a video from Ice Cube where Ice Cube was like, hey, we remember what happened between, Tupac and Biggie and all of that. You guys need to be careful. You're firing shots at each other. And we get it, beefing is part of the rap culture and the competitiveness of it and everything. But you need to be careful because for those of us that remembered what happened with East Coast, West Coast, things can get accelerated, things can happen. You need to be careful. So I thought that was an interesting quote by Ice Cube. I'm also going to give an honorable mention to Snoop Dogg because funnily enough, Snoop Dogg has similar placements to Drake. And Snoop Dogg has a Mercury Venus conjunction in Scorpio like Drake does. And there's a funny video from Drake or from Snoop Dogg where he's talking about the song In My Feelings when Drake is like, Kiki, do you love me? Are you riding? All this, and it's kind of a cute beat. And Snoop Dogg was like, I actually love that song. I think it's really catchy. He's like, Kiki, are you riding? Are you? Anyway, and Snoop Dogg is like, I can see why that song is really like doing well. And I've been wanting to do Snoop Dogg's chart for a while too, but he's got a lot of similar placements to Drake. He's got the Mercury Venus conjunction in Scorpio as well. And Snoop, as much as he is like a gangster, Snoop is really a lover. He's not a fighter, and Snoop has Taurus rising, and he's all about cooking shows with Martha Stewart and wines and vineyards and smoking out and, making love and all of that. He's very laid back, Snoop Dogg. And it's funny because when Drake came out with a diss track towards Kendrick, one of the diss tracks, Drake had used AI to basically imitate Snoop Dogg's voice and Tupac's voice and put them in a song against Kendrick. Well, what do we see happening in Drake's chart, right? Drake has Mars at 8 degrees Aquarius. We know that Pluto is in the early degrees of Aquarius. So Pluto is creeping up on Drake's Mars and Aquarius right here. And we know that this Pluto and Aquarius stuff has brought to light a lot of AI things and the responsible use of AI in music. And that Pluto and Aquarius right on Drake's Mars and Aquarius squaring his natal Pluto and his natal sun. He's having a big old Pluto transit right now, Drake is, and using AI to get back at Kendrick. Now, Snoop Dogg, I just love Snoop Dogg. Like, he's so funny. He comes on Twitter and he's like, I woke up and he put a video up and he's like, I woke up and I found out all this stuff is going on and I don't know what's going on. He was basically like, someone used my voice and he's like, I'm going back to bed. And I just thought that was so funny. I was like, oh my God, Snoop Dogg. He's like, I'm going back to bed. Like these, if somebody used my voice on an AI track, whatever, I'm going back to bed. But not so funny for Drake was that Tupac's estate actually, sent him a letter and told him, if you keep using Tupac's voice in this song, we are going to sue you. And so, talk about Mars, Pluto, AI, Aquarius, all of that. If you keep using Tupac's voice, we will sue you. And so Drake, of course, pulled that back and stopped using that AI with Tupac. But Snoop was funny. He's like, I'm sleeping. I don't know what's going on. And I'm like, that is too funny. Anyway, yeah, Snoop is a Libra. Yeah, he is a Libra. Yep, Pinky Snoop is a Libra. He has a bunch of planets in Scorpio though. He's got Mercury and Venus in Scorpio and he's a Taurus rising. But he is a Libra and he's just like, he's so chill. Like he's got that so chill vibe about him. And anyway, I just think that he's funny. What a national treasure Snoop Dogg is. And yeah, Snoop Dogg is still alive and he's using his voice as AI and Snoop's like, I don't know what's going on. I'm going back to bed, So, but anyway, so there's that whole thing. And I thought it was funny to mention the AI because Drake is clearly having a Pluto transit with the Mars and Aquarius and, his whole Sun, Pluto, Mars and Aquarius thing is really blowing up with this Pluto transit for him. So probably a lot more to come on that. Now, so anyway, we talked about the eclipses. We talked about, everything blowing up during eclipse season, the diss tracks, how they came out at the eclipses, at the moment that the eclipses were on their nodes individually. Okay, I still have more for you guys, though. I'm not done with the synastry yet. And I want to show you guys another thing in the chart, synastry-wise. Also, there's one thing I looked at right away, okay? And this is Kendrick's ascendant. So as we spoke about, Kendrick is a Libra rising, and his ascendant is right on top of the south node of Drake. Okay, so Drake's south node at 20 degrees Libra is right there on Kendrick's ascendant. They are joined together. Kendrick's ascendant, Drake's south node, or K2, okay, joined together and are in a conjunction with each other. Now, right away, before I even saw their charts and I just had written down both of their birthdays on a piece of paper, I was like, oh, Drake is older than Kendrick. And automatically, I just, by a little bit, like they have enough distance between them age-wise to to kind of be brothers, like that type of thing. And immediately I thought about brothers and older brother versus younger brother, and how brothers sometimes fight and try to outdo each other. And I hadn't even looked at their charts yet, but I got this kind of older brother, younger brother vibe. Now, when I looked at the synastry, I was like, oh my God, like, of course, we have the, and of course, Drake's or Kendrick's ascendant is falling into Drake's third house of brothers and siblings. And I was like, no, it can't be. And then I saw that Kendrick's ascendant is on top of Drake's south node. And I was like, okay, were these two brothers in a past life? Do they have karma to settle up with people here? Is Kendrick acting like the little brother, like poking at him and poking at him? And Drake is like, leave me alone, like the older brother, I don't want anything to do with you, like that type of energy. Do we have some brotherly shit going on here? And it really like, yeah, it's interesting because Drake was born in 1986 and Kendrick was born in 1987. So Drake is actually older than Kendrick. And immediately I was like, okay, like this is like some older brother, younger brother type of stuff going on here. And Pinky says Taurus rising, smoke weed every day. Taurus rising, I'm going back to bed, Snoop Dogg. Oh my God. As a Taurus, I completely approved. It's like, I'm not getting involved with any of this fighting. I'm going to go back to bed. I was like, oh, thank God for Snoop and some levity in the situation. But yeah, we've got the ascendant K2 with the south node, okay? Or the south node with the ascendant here. And it's falling in Drake's house, third house of siblings. And that to me, I was like, whoa, there could be something that Drake owes Kendrick from a past life that has been forgotten, that Kendrick is trying to remind him of, is something that I thought. Now, regardless of whether you believe in past lives or not, or anything like that, I'm not trying to offend anybody with that. I'm obviously, not God. I'm not like, but you got to wonder when you look at the third house, the ascendant falling in his third house and K2 is there is some mysterious connection that's tied to the past between both of them. And what I wrote down about that is, K2 or the south node represents someone who is in the lower position society-wise, like, or the person who is less admired. K2 is definitely, the north node is about being admired and being seen as a winner. And the south node is about retiring from that or pulling back from that or going inward from that. And it's interesting because the Jupiter is opposing that too as well. And, from Kendrick's chart, the Jupiter is opposing this whole, mess right here. And there is something about, like camaraderie, friends, siblings, brotherhood. And Drake kind of like, and maybe in a past life, Drake pulled away from that, or he abandoned that, or he wasn't there for Kendrick in some way, and now in this lifetime, it's like Kendrick's kind of getting the glory between the two in a lot of ways. I mean, Drake gets a lot of glory too, but I also feel like because Drake is represented by K2 in this, Drake is not really that excited about the altercation or the competition. And I even got the feeling listening to his interviews from earlier, like 10 years ago, where he's like, nah, he's like, kind of just like that and kind of brushing it off. And you get the sense, I got the sense that Kendrick was more intent on like, Drake, notice me, or Drake, you better notice me, or you better see me, or I'm showing up here. And so there is something, with K2 where I feel like Drake is kind of like, leave me alone, or is coming across as the one who is less admired or in the lower position in all of this, even though Drake has had arguably like more record sales. I think he's richer than Kendrick, all of that. But when it comes to Libra energy in the sense of who is more socially liked or who is more socially supported. It definitely is, and a lot of people are agreeing it's Kendrick that's coming out the winner in that. And it's Drake that kind of appears to be the one to kind of, backing away from things. And that's a very K2 energy of kind of backing off or backing away from something where, it's almost like the little brother needing to get the validation or approval from the big brother. But in this lifetime, Kendrick's like, I'm not playing second fiddle to you anymore. I'm a better writer and rapper than you. And don't say that we're on the same level because we're not, but a lot of that could come from a position in the past of maybe feeling lesser or not feeling good enough, or, something in a past life where Drake avoided him and didn't help him. And in this lifetime, it's interesting because Drake originally like kind of brought Kendrick over and supported him and had really good things to say about him and put him on his record. And so we can see that energy too in the chart because, what's funny, you guys, is that their moons are actually trining each other. So the moon in Cancer for Drake is actually in a trine to Kendrick's moon in Cancer, and Drake's Jupiter is also on Kendrick's moon in Pisces. Okay. And Jupiter is a growth engine. Jupiter helps us grow and helps us take off, right? But there is this whole thing, with older brother, little brother, like older brother gives me a start. Older brother, Drake was, more successful before Kendrick, or Drake was before Kendrick, and then Kendrick came after him and now has risen to this artist in, even a much more, more evolved artist, maybe even than Drake, because of Drake's maybe refusal to tap into some of the deeper things in his life. Kendrick has outgrown him as an artist, right? But at the same time, you can see Drake's Jupiter on top of Kendrick's moon, helping. There's that, it's like secretly I helped you grow in Drake's eighth house. It's like I actually gave you a boost, or I actually lifted you up. And Drake did put Kendrick on one of his albums. And then of course, Drake went on one of Kendrick's albums and they were collaborating with each other. And I actually think on a deep level, they may be more alike emotionally than they're actually willing to admit. I just think, I just think Kendrick is more fluid with being able to express himself and emotions and even the hard stuff or the difficult things. And I think for Drake, it's more of a hidden thing. And we talked about that earlier in the reading and why his chart is like that and why we said that. But their moons are actually in a trine to each other, and they were friends before, and they did help each other out. And certainly through these rap battles and these rap beefs, they are helping each other out. Their career, like more people know about them. I mean, I listened to Kendrick's music for the first time. I mean, I'd heard some of his music before, but I didn't really seriously listen to it until I was looking at all this and preparing. And Drake, I hadn't listened to for a long time, but I obviously knew it from a long time ago. So this whole thing is actually kind of secretly helping both of them grow. And, maybe joke's on us, maybe underneath it, moon trine moon, maybe they actually do like each other underneath it, and they're just doing it to make more money, secret eighth house shit, Jupiter conjunction moon, and it's through the eighth house. So it's like, maybe they actually are secretly helping each other grow or secretly benefiting each other, and they just don't really know it, So I think that could be, yeah. And Cringe says Drake's node is activating Kendrick's Jupiter, and Drake is saying he's glad he got Kendrick to release music again. That's also very brotherly, Cringe. Yes, that is very brotherly to say, hey, yeah, like, and it's almost kind of interesting because Drake is kind of like, he's like, well, I got you to do more music, so good, which is, it's not really fighting. That's not really fighting, that's just like a statement. It seems to me like Drake is less of a fighter in what he's saying or doing, or he's more like pushing it under the rug or whatever. And that's also kind of something a bigger brother would do when like the little brother's coming at him and is like, fight me, bro, fight me, fight me. And the older brother's like, like that type of thing. And I kind of got that energy from their interaction again. But also, like, I mean, obviously, Kendrick won a Pulitzer Prize, and he obviously is an amazing artist of his own accord, with or without Drake, you know. So, what I would like to see from both of them, honestly, is for both of them to mature a little bit more as artists and to go deeper with their music and not spend the time tearing apart each other's families or each other's relationships. Cause it's like, come on, man, it would be nice to see them go in some, it's been fun, it's been real, it's been whatever. But at the same time, I mean, for me personally, it would be nice to see them mature in other ways, particularly Drake, because I feel like Kendrick is maturing in other ways and he's got other things he's doing for that. But it would be nice to see Drake, maybe. And actually, when I first started reading about it, it seems like Kendrick was really picking at Drake, and Drake was like, man, like he was almost being the more mature one at first, like back in the day, like 10 years ago, so it'd be nice to kind of get that energy back and not just be, constantly in a beef. I mean, but anyway, that is, and also too, yeah, with the moon, the moon is, the moon in Pisces, the moon in Cancer, trining each other. It's like you guys are more alike than you're willing to admit, probably like emotionally on a deep level. And you just don't want to see it. It's in the 12th house, it's in the 8th house. You're not seeing it, but you're actually more alike probably than you even give each other credit for. So those are some, like, not on an artist level, because I feel they're very different artistically, but on an emotional level, yeah. I mean, come on now. So anyway, you guys, that is, let's see if there's anything else I had written down. And yeah, you guys, I think that is about it for the reading tonight. I hope that you enjoyed that. I know I really enjoyed preparing it for you guys. And I hope that I don't think I've ever done synastry before on one of these readings. So it was kind of fun to show you guys some synastry and how the charts are interrelating with each other. And after the video, after I'm done posting everything, I will put a link to my website below. And someone mentioned that I didn't have any slots open right now. So I'll open up some slots if you're wanting to get a personal natal chart reading with me. I do appreciate your guys' support on my channel. And thank you everyone so much for being here. And I wish you a very lovely evening. Take care, everybody. Ah.